Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Molten Truth. I am your host, Zoey Michaels. As you know, this show is about people were just going about their lives, just normal, and then something happened that caused them to take stock, maybe change their path, maybe took them in a whole different direction than they ever imagined. So, we're going to open up with a question. What would you do if you were trapped on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center? Yes, this is live, or at least a version of live, of the World Trade Center, blind, when the first plane hit. Michael Hingson didn't just survive 911, he led others to safety. And while most people think that he would have simply been guided by his trusted service dog, they actually worked as a team together. So Roselle is the name of that dog. And today he's a #1 international best-selling author and a powerful voice for resilience, trust, and true inclusion. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I am so excited about just the things you're going to share with us about your experience and about more than that, what you built from that experience.
Well, yeah, the experience, of course, everyone in a sense knows about. People know about September 11th, except now we have a whole new generation of people who really don't know about September 11th other than reading about it in a history book because they're too young to experience it. I
Yes.
would say since it happened on September 11th, 2001,
Mm-hmm.
we're almost 24 years, 23 years, 9 months. And then for children who were probably under 3 or 4 at the time, they don't really remember it either. And then children who were above that age may or may not remember it. So it's a whole new generation. And so, although I didn't start out thinking this, my desire is that I get to help people essentially live through what I lived through to come out and understand not only what being blind is all about, but what it was like in the World Trade Center and why I was able to experience it and survive. And so that's really what has happened ever since September 11th for me, because people started hearing about my story, the media got it, and then people started calling and saying, we want to hire you to come and talk to us about the World Trade Center, what happened, and lessons we should learn from it. And so we got so many of those that my late wife and I decided selling life and philosophy is a whole lot more fun and enjoyable and rewarding than managing a computer hardware sales team and selling computer hardware. And so ever since essentially the beginning of 2002, that's what I've been doing.
Amazing. I mean, and I think I would agree. I mean, given a choice between dealing with technology and the scope of the work you were doing, which I believe you said that you were the one who had scoped out the office space and had built, I think, a team to work there at the World Trade Center, if I remember correctly.
I was hired by Quantum Corporation to open an office in New York City. And we couldn't find space that I was really happy with until I decided to take a chance and call the Port Authority real estate people to talk about what might be available in the World Trade Center, only to learn that because of some other issues that had happened several years before, namely someone had exploded a bomb down in the parking lot on the
Ah,
level
yes.
4th sublevel, which didn't do a lot of damage, but it did cause a lot of people to decide to move out of the World Trade Center. We were able to get good office space at a good price, and so we did that. But yeah, I was hired to open that office and to hire a team and to represent Quantum Corporation, which we did, and also we worked with the team to develop a good sales effort in the city.
Absolutely. And I know that you still have maybe a little bit to do with technology. At least I've seen some things where
Oh,
you've
sure.
done some speaking about that, including about AI, but perhaps that's a subject for another day. You have such a huge resume. I'm like, man, I could have 7 or 8 episodes just talking to Michael. He's got all kinds of information to share with us.
Well, it all interrelates. Yeah, I work with a company called Accessibe, ACCESSIBE, that makes products that help make internet websites more inclusive and accessible for people with a variety of different kinds of disabilities. I've helped other companies bring products to market as well, including one called IRA, AIRA, which stands for Artificial Intelligent Remote Assistance, which is a product that is using what's called a visual interpreter. That is primarily, until recently, you could go into the app if you were blind or had some other disability that required it,
Mhm.
and you could actually interact with an agent who was trained to describe whatever they saw, and they could see through glasses that you wore or your iPhone or smartphone, not just an iPhone, but your smartphone, and could provide information also that had access to GPS information. And so they could help you walk somewhere if you needed to. But the issue was that they were trained to do that. So it wasn't taking away anyone's independence, but rather it was giving people better access to information that typically is only available to people with full eyesight. So we help bring that to market. And with Accessibility, among other things, I do a podcast called Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. Worded that way because typical DEI people never talk about disabilities. And so we put inclusion first because the bottom line is you're not inclusive unless you also include disabilities. And if you don't talk about disabilities and you don't pay attention to disabilities, then you're not inclusive. So it's an all or nothing situation.
Absolutely right. Um, you're making me think of actually a podcast I just uploaded this weekend that I released that was talking about that in relation to employment for people who suffer from autism and how they're highly employable. But that's again another subject that's kind of like squirrel.
Well,
But
sure, and the issue is with them, whether it's autism, whether it's being blind or deaf or hard of hearing
mm-hmm,
or whatever, um, if you really step back and think about it, when an employment situation is involved,
mm-hmm.
employers are providing reasonable accommodations for all of you sighted light dependent people
So
too.
true.
You have you
Absolutely.
you have windows that you can look out. You
Mm-hmm,
have computer monitors that are provided. You have a coffee machine that's typically a touch screen, so that makes it not inclusive for people who can't use a touch screen machine very easily.
mm-hmm,
Um, you have lights so that you people can get around, but the reality is those are just as much reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities as what I would require. And the reason I put it that way is that in reality, everyone on the planet has a disability. And the biggest disability that people have is light dependence. You need light to function. And if you don't have it, you have a lot of problems. That doesn't mean anything other than you too have a disability. And we need to get out of the habit of thinking that a so called disability makes you less than someone else because it doesn't. Some people tell me, well, disability certainly means a lack of ability or not as good as others because it begins with dis.
right.
And my comment is, yeah, well, what about decipher, discern, and discrete, for example? They begin with dis. So no,
Nice comeback.
the reality is that disability is a characteristic that everyone has. It just manifests itself differently for different people. But
Sure.
the reality is, don't think that I am less than someone else simply because I don't see. That only means I have different gifts and I know how to use them, and
Mhm.
expect you to give me the same level of reasonable accommodations that you give to sighted people who need light to function.
Absolutely. In a dark room, that is your strength. You can lead people out of dark and smoke and so on. Whereas we're all stumbling around, tripping over each other because we don't
Well,
have that skill set.
even in a room with light, if you don't know where to look or you're not looking at the right thing because you tend to be afraid,
Yeah.
that is also an issue. I worked in the World Trade Center and learned what to do in order to be able to function in an emergency situation, and that mindset clicked in on September 11th. But the bottom line is that it's all about knowledge. And so, and I know we're going to talk about it, but the reality is that people become afraid of so many things, and they create a lot of their own fear anyway. And so what I did and it was published in 2024, was I wrote a book called Live Like a Guide Dog, along with a co-author, Carrie Wyatt Kent. We
Mm.
wrote it together. And Live Like a Guide Dog uses lessons I've learned from 8 guide dogs and my wife's service dog about dealing with fear. And the reality is that we fear everything under the sun. We're always fearing about this and that, and what if, or what if this happens, what if that happens, most
Mhm.
of which will never happen, and most of which don't affect us, but we still worry about it. And that helps generate fear. And the reality
Right.
is we can learn how to control that.
Right. Well, because fear can be protective, but if it paralyzes you, then it's damaging.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that really called out to me during our moment when we had just kind of an advanced conversation about what are we going to talk about, when we do the recording, was the idea that you wanted to teach other people about not panicking. Would love to hear about that.
Well, and that's what Live Like a Guide Dog is all about. The reality is we fear everything. We're taught to fear, which is so unfortunate. And there's so many things in our world that we fear, um, that we don't need to fear. And so the fact is that we need to learn to focus on what we can control and not worry about the rest. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be aware of it, but it also doesn't mean that we need to fear it and that we need to allow it to overwhelm, or as I would put it, blind us.
Mhm.
So focusing on the things that we can control is what is really important. And then really don't worry about the rest of it. Again, it isn't a matter of being aware or not, but you don't need to worry about the things over which you don't have any influence. We have um, political leaders right now that have caused so many people to be afraid of so many things. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have any control over all of that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be aware, but you don't have control. Our first opportunity to control, if we really don't like what's going on in our country, comes next year when we have a chance to vote.
Mhm.
But until that happens, fearing it and worrying about it isn't going to do anybody any good. It certainly isn't going to do us good, and it's not going to do the politicians good unless they are willing to listen to other people and maybe learn that in reality things are a little bit different in the perceptions of most people. But those are choices. My choice is not to worry about the things that I don't have any direct influence over right now.
And that's really sound advice for all of us. There are a lot of big decisions that go on every day that, yeah, they may trickle down, they may affect us, maybe in a broad scope, but does it affect our day-to-day life? Not necessarily.
Hmm.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, most days it's just about dealing with our families, dealing with our job, dealing with our own health or mental or whatever issues that we might be dealing with. But
Right.
yeah, absolutely right. So, going back a little bit, Roselle was the dog who was with you in the World Trade Center, right?
Correct. Yes, she
Okay,
was.
yeah. And I believe you also wrote a children's book that was running with Roselle.
Running with Roselle. And that was really about me growing up and Roselle growing up and how we met and bonded and formed a team. So it isn't really much about September 11th, although a little bit,
Hmm.
but it was really about the two of us and, how we developed a relationship and developed a teaming relationship. And
Yeah.
in fact, that's really true of all 3 books: Thunderdog, the story of a blind man and his guide dog, and the triumph of trust at ground zero, that we published in 2011, that became a New York Times bestseller and one week was a #1 New York Times bestseller. Then Running with Roselle, and then last August of 2024, Live Like a Guide Dog: True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith, was published.
Nice. Very nice. Are there any specific pieces of advice that maybe come to mind that you'd like to share with people who maybe are dealing with maybe nothing as drastic as you dealt with? Because I mean, on the pinnacle of drastic things, 911 is right up there with Pearl Harbor and all these crazy. I don't even know how to describe, just mega events, I guess. So, what about just challenges in general? Do you have any thoughts or advice for people who are dealing with things that are up there, but maybe not mega to that extent.
Well, are they really up there? First of all, the reality is that, again, my first piece of advice is don't worry about the things that you can't control.
Mhm.
So one of my favorite stories is that when Roselle and I got home at the end of the day on September 11th, I
Mhm.
took her harness off and was going to have her and take her outside, but she would have none of it. She ran off. She grabbed her favorite tug bone and started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog Linny, who
Wow.
also was a yellow lab. And I realized, actually, I also talked to the people, the veterinarians and so on at Guide Dogs for the Blind, where I got all of my guide dogs, and they said, "Well, did anything really affect her on September 11th?" And I said, "No, nothing really directly came at her." And they said, "Well, there's your answer. Dogs don't do what ifs.
Mhm.
They live in the moment. They're aware of things that go on around them, but they worry about what they have to worry about and not worry about the rest of it." And that is something that we all can learn. So, I live in California, and people around the country talk about the fact of earthquakes out here. Oh, I'll never live there because there might be an earthquake, and there's going to they keep talking about the big one. And some
Mhm.
people in California, and they worry about that. What control do you have over that earthquake happening?
Yeah,
And
not a
that's the
thing.
and that's the issue. That doesn't mean you don't prepare for the time that maybe it does.
Mhm.
And maybe the scientists are right. It will happen at some point, but you can be prepared. You can stockpile water. You can have a first aid kit. You can have other things that are available to you that you have, so that if there is ever an earthquake, you can grab them and you can go or whatever. But that doesn't mean you fear it. It's not going to do you any good to fear it. And the only thing it's going to do is drive you crazy. And you look every day for the earthquake. Well, that doesn't help. So the reality is we need to really learn to focus on, I'm not going to say what matters, but what we have control over. And again, it doesn't mean you don't be aware of the other stuff, but you don't fear it, because it's not going to do you any good. And so earthquakes are a great example. There are so many other examples of things that happen. There are people who go and stalk people on the streets and so on. And again, there are things that you can do to prevent that from happening to you, like stay off the streets at night, don't walk alone. But again, fearing it isn't going to help.
Right. It's that fear moving you to take specific action to protect yourself, like you mentioned, like water and food, or
But
taking
that
the
shouldn't be
safety
fear.
of.
But that's not fear. That's being
Mm,
aware. And that's what I'm saying is
yeah.
get rid of the fear, because it's not
Mhm.
going to do you any good and it's going to drive you crazy.
Mhm.
One of the things that we really advise people, and it's in Live Like a Guide Dog, and I talk about it many times when I speak, is that in reality, there are so many things that we worry about and we go to sleep worrying about them, keeps us awake. What we should really do at the end of every day is take some time to think about what happened today. What were the good things that happened? What were the things that weren't quite so good? I never will use the word failure, because it's not. There's no such thing as real failure. What there is maybe something that you planned didn't go the way you thought.
Mhm.
So the question is, why didn't it? What was I afraid of? What can I do to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And even the good things, what went really well? Could I make it go better in some way? And if you think about those things while you fall asleep, the other part of it is listening to your inner voice that will tell you what you need to do differently. But you have to be open to listening to that voice and and following through on it. My favorite example of that is the game Trivial Pursuit, and a lot of people have played Trivial Pursuit, and maybe you have.
Mhm.
Um, but when you're playing the game, have you played Trivial Pursuit?
A long time ago, but I do know the
Okay,
game. Yes.
okay. So how many times did somebody ask a question reading off the card, and you immediately thought of an answer, but then you went, "Oh, that's just too simple. It can't be that," and you thought of something else, and when you answered it with the second thing you thought of, and you didn't really answer with what you originally thought of, and what you originally thought of was the right answer.
Yes. And not just in
Exactly.
Trivial Pursuit, sometimes in real life,
Oh, it's
even when I was
absolutely
in
an
school.
I'm just using Trivial Pursuit as the example,
Yeah.
but the point is your voice is there and it's telling you, but
Mhm.
you need to be open to listening to it, and that's what I encourage people to do at night. Um, I have begun using a different phrase than I used to when I talk about recording speeches or thinking about the things that I've done and what worked and what didn't. I
Mhm.
used to say I'm my own worst critic, and that's true. I tend to analyze more than anybody else about me, but
Mhm.
I'm not my own worst critic anymore. I've realized that that's not the thing to say. But in reality, what I should be saying, since I'm the only person who can really teach me, people can provide me with information, but
Mhm.
I'm the only one who can really teach me. So I'm not my own worst critic. I'm my own best teacher. Think of how
Ah,
much more positive that is.
nice paradigm shift. I
And
like
it's
it.
and it's not a threat. I'm my own best teacher, pure and simple. And
Mhm.
I need to learn to listen to me.
That is probably the most positive slant I've ever heard on that thought process.
Well, it's important because it also helps deal with this whole thing about fear.
Hmm.
It puts you more in a mode to learn, which
Hmm.
is what you should be doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, does that tie in with your thoughts about teaching future generations, or is that a separate thought in general?
It's related because I want future generations not only to know what happened in the World Trade Center, but how it got dealt with. So look, I mentioned earlier that I spent a lot of time talking to the Port Authority police, um, the New York police, the fire department, emergency preparedness people, and I learned everything I could, not only about what to do in the case of an emergency, but how to function and work around the World Trade Center because I was the leader of an office. And I can't rely and shouldn't rely on someone saying, well, let's say we have a customer in and we're talking about contracts and we're talking about our products and we show them the products. And then we're going to take a break and go to lunch. I can't take the position, I'm blind. I don't know how to get anywhere. Someone's going to have to lead me. What's going
Hmm.
to happen when we come back upstairs and we're negotiating a multi-million dollar contract? So in reality, I learned where the restaurants were. I learned how to get around the World Trade Center. And if we were going to go to lunch, I could say, like any leader of an office would, so where do you want to go? What kind of food do you want? Okay, I can take you down to a deli. There's a great restaurant down on the first floor called Fine and Shapiro. Great deli. Let's go there. That okay? All right, I'll lead the way and do it. Um, and that's what's really important. So I learned all that I could about all of this. It isn't just reading signs, because I'm not going to read signs, but rather the knowledge kicked in and I was able to survive getting out of the World Trade Center. Most people don't spend that time, but they should. Um, they they need to really learn because knowledge is what's real power, whether it's an emergency situation or anything else.
Absolutely right. You know, once upon a time, I used to teach English to people online, and there was this one particular subject I would have with my students in the lesson plan. It involved situations where minimal people survived, and it was because they took immediate action. So it makes me curious about your situation. I mean, how quickly did you guys realize that that plane had crashed, and how quickly did you go from that moment of clarity to we've got to get out of here, if I may
Different
ask?
different question actually, because we didn't know that a plane had crashed for a while. The
Uh-huh.
airplane hit eight, and I'm not talking about just me, and I'm not just talking about the people in my office. People on our side of the building didn't know. The airplane for us struck roughly 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. How could we possibly have known that it was an airplane and that it was a terrorist attack? None
Right.
of us could. Superman and X ray vision really are still fictitious. And so the bottom line is that what did happen, though, was that the plane hit the building. And then as I'm moving my hand toward the camera, the building tipped like that. And it tipped about 20 feet. And then it
Ah.
came back the other way. So we knew that something was going on. And as soon as it stopped moving, my colleague David Frank, who was in that day from our corporate office, turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window. We got to get out of here." Well, I could hear things brushing by the window,
Mhm.
and now I knew what they were, millions of pieces of burning paper. But I told David, "Slow down, don't worry, we'll get out." "No, we got to get out of here right now. The building's on fire." I believed him.
Hmm.
But the thing is that David, and then David finally used the big line I love to call it, you don't understand, you can't see it. Well, that isn't quite the issue. I knew everything that David saw because he was yelling it and describing it. The
Right.
problem was that David wasn't seeing what I was seeing. And I'm very deliberate in using that term because to see is to perceive. It isn't necessarily with your eyes. So
Agreed. Yes.
David wasn't seeing what I wasn't seeing. Namely, sitting next to me was a dog wagging her tail and yawning and going, "Who woke me up?" Because Roselle came out from under my desk and she was quite calm. And the reality is, I knew what Roselle was like when she was afraid because she was afraid of thunderstorms. We didn't have a thunderstorm then.
Hmm.
We had an airplane that struck the building. It wasn't very loud, but it did tip the building. And then, of course, it came back vertical again.
Hmm.
And so it took me a little while to get David to focus. And I then told David, get our guests to the stairs, start them down, then come back and we'll leave. I mean, so we didn't waste any time deciding to get out, but we also, because of the approach that I took and what I observed, realized that nothing was so imminent of a danger to us that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what we did. So David got our guests to the stairs, and I told him, don't let them take the elevators because you're seeing fire. And if that fire is in the elevator shafts, then anybody getting into an elevator car is not going to make it. And that, of course, did happen. So David got guests to the stairs and he came back. We swept the office. By that time, I had called my wife. The media hadn't gotten the story yet. So, but I
Hmm.
told her that we were evacuating. Then David came back. We swept the office, made sure there was no one else there. And then we went to the stairs and started down. And almost immediately, I began smelling an odor. And it was a familiar odor, but I couldn't place it, mainly because I didn't expect to smell it in the World Trade Center. It took me about 4 floors to realize I was smelling what I smelled every time I went to an airport, namely burning jet fuel. And when I observed that to other people on the stairs, they said, yeah, you're right. We were trying to figure out what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane. You see, nobody knew.
Right. And you
And
guys didn't stick around long enough to see the second plane hit the other tower, so
oh
it
heavens,
makes
no,
sense. Yeah.
no.
So
That was like 20 minutes later. And so, no, we and I don't know whether we would have seen it anyway. And we didn't know about that plane until we got outside. Well, we didn't know about the plane hitting actually until both buildings had collapsed. But when we got outside, David saw fire in Tower 2, but we didn't know where it came from because we didn't know. But no, we weren't going to wait.
absolutely. Um, and only if it's comfortable for you to speak about it, because I can only imagine there must be some triggers that you might still, I mean, all these years later, perhaps there's things that come back. But my brother actually was living in New York at that time. He was literally across the river
Mm,
watching all of this happen. You know, he heard what happened with the first building, had just gotten upstairs to the rooftop of where he worked, and within minutes saw the second plane hit.
mhm.
So I mean, he had nightmares for months afterwards. I'd be curious, like after your situation, after the realization of what happened, how did you fare following all of that?
Well, for me, it was who would have thought anybody would do this? I've had some dreams about it, but I've not really stressed about it because, again, I deal with fear in a little bit different way.
Hmm.
Um, I certainly was glad to get out. And then I got home. And for the next week, I was basically as stiff as a board because I had come down all those stairs and all the adrenaline
Ooh,
rush and so on. And when it
yes.
died off, so we lived in a house with an elevator because my wife had been in a wheelchair her whole life, and it was a 2-story house plus a basement. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you, for the next week, I used the elevator more than she did. Um, but again, um, it's like so many other kinds of things, buyer's remorse or any number of different things.
Hmm.
The fact is, it happened. Um, and I am absolutely of the opinion that no one could have predicted it. I don't, and I've read the reports, the World Trade Center report and so on. Nothing has ever convinced me that even if the departments in this country had all worked together, they would have figured it out because 19 or a few more people kept a secret
Yeah.
and they didn't tell. So the reality is that, again, it happened. We didn't have control over it happening, but we absolutely had control over how we dealt with what happened.
Mhm.
And so for me, the next day, I had contacted, among other places, the school where I've gotten all of my guide dogs. And the director of public information services, Joanne Ritter, decided that she wanted to write a story about it. And I said, that's fine. And then she said, I'll bet you're going to be on television. What do you want to be on? And I said, oh, Larry King Live first. Um, and 2 days later, on the 14th, I had the first of 5 interviews on Larry King Live, and the media got the story. But what happened was then I started getting literally hundreds of calls from different press and media who wanted to talk with me. And that was probably for me the best thing that could happen, because I did talk about it. And I think that when something like this happens, people should talk about it. So I don't know whether your brother ever reached out for counseling or talked to people, but people should talk about it and put it in perspective. And the reality is, the perspective is, we didn't have control over it happening. But as I said, we absolutely have control over how we deal with what happened. And we don't need to fear something that did happen. The question is, how are we going to move forward from it? Well, I was offered the opportunity, essentially, of traveling and speaking about it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 23 plus years.
Which is again amazing. Amazing that it opened up an opportunity for healing, because when we talk about it, that affect labeling decreases our emotional state. But then also that you wound up finding basically a whole new career in becoming
Well,
a public speaker, right?
it decreases our emotional state if we let it,
Mm.
whatever that may mean. But the reality is that, for me, because I started talking about it, and it seemed like so many people wanted to learn, that it made a lot of sense to take the opportunity to start to talk about it.
Hmm.
Speaking is something that I think I can do fairly well, and so I've been doing it ever since, telling the story, talking about other things relating to it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it completely changed my career in a sense. I'm still selling, but I'm not selling computer hardware or technology as much directly. What I
Hmm.
am selling is life philosophy, and a message that said and does say, things can happen to you. The question is, how are you going to deal with it? And you can learn to deal with things that happen to you. Now, of course, being in the World Trade Center and going down the stairs, at any time, the building might have collapsed.
Could happen. Yeah.
And if that had happened, we would probably not be having this conversation quite the same way.
Hmm.
Um, might have had a séance or something. But the bottom line is, um, it didn't collapse. And people have said, well, weren't you afraid that that could happen? And my response was, no, I was busy encouraging Roselle and working with my teammate to make sure that she continued to believe and understand that I was calm and I was okay, because she had to sense all the fear around us. She
I'm
had to sense
sure.
all the tension. So it was up to me to tell her, I'm okay. Let's keep going. What a good dog. And praise her all the way down the stairs, which I did, and which went really well. But but the reality is, that's part of why I was able to function, because I had her to encourage and to work with. And likewise, she just continued to guide and do the things that she does. And, guide dogs don't lead blind people around. The dog's job is not to know where to go and how to get there. And I don't want the dog to know that. That's my job. The job of the dog is to make sure that we walk safely. And oh, yes, there are times that the dog, if we do something consistently the same way, the dog is going to get into the habit of doing it, and and so that can be a help sometimes. But in reality, the job of a guide dog is to make sure that we walk safely, to stop at the curbs,
Hmm.
to go around poles and things like that. But it's my job to know where to go and how to get there, and give the dog step by step directions. Now, it's a lot easier today because we have so many things on smartphones and other kinds of technologies that give me a lot more information than even 23 years ago we had. And so I'm able to do a lot more of it than I used to be able to. But that is as easily do as much as I want to. Back in the days of the World Trade Center and me being there, it was all about spending the time walking around and learning where things were and so on. And I would still probably do that today, but we're getting a lot more technology to help with navigation for everyone.
Absolutely. And I love that we have that technology. I love having a map that has a higher degree of accuracy than it did 20 plus years ago, back in the days of MapQuest versus our maps on our phones now. But I really appreciated you setting me straight on the idea of what a seeing eye dog
What
does.
a guide dog does. The seeing eye dog comes from the seeing eye in New Jersey. It's a brand like Coke,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
but
See,
they're all colas. So guide dog is more generic term.
yeah. See, and again, just helping to better understand that, because I grew up in the time of Lassie and all these other thoughts where the
Yeah,
dog rescued the human.
yeah. Well, Timmy never did fall down the well, but that's another story.
So it's nice to have a better understanding of how really it is teamwork, and that you are the one making the decisions and the dog is just there maybe to again keep you safe, watch for the curb, that type of thing.
But that's important too. And
Yeah.
it's the reality is it's a close knit team relationship because we both each understand what each other does,
Hmm.
and it's our job to respect it. So, for example, I come to a street corner, and the dog stops at a curb, and then I tell my dog to go forward. The dog doesn't go. And I say forward. The dog doesn't go. My immediate reaction is not going to be, "What's the problem with you, you dumb dog?" My reaction, because it's me, is going
Hmm.
to be, "What's the issue?" And typically, of course, what it is, especially today,
Hmm.
we have a quiet car or a hybrid vehicle running on electric mode, running coming down the street, and I can't
Mm.
hear it, but the dog sees it. I'm not going to assume that the dog sees a duck and is being distracted. Actually, that would be a different reaction anyway. But the bottom line is, if the dog doesn't do what I expect, my job is to believe there's got to be a reason for it,
Hmm.
and
And then
that's a
figure it out.
process called intelligent disobedience. The dog has the right and understands that it has the right to disobey what I want it to do if it feels that it would put us in danger. So, yeah, typically it's a quiet car coming down the street and it passes us, and then the dog will go when I say forward.
That makes sense. Or perhaps in a situation where you have map instructions, but it's an area unknown to you, maybe it's a deeper drop or maybe a dead end that you didn't perceive. I would guess that would also play in.
Well, sure. I mean, those are all different kinds of issues. It could be a very steep curb.
Hmm.
Um, but again, the dog guides. So the dog is actually a step or so ahead of me.
Hmm.
And if the dog refuses to go, then I'm going to assume there is some sort of reason for it. And we'll
Hmm.
figure it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do love having that better understanding, since, sometimes I feel like those of us who do have our sight should have the experience of basically having to play blind man's bluff for an entire day, just to
Well,
have a sense of what you, at least on a small scale, what you guys encounter.
the problem is that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that unless you really get the training, it's like you get a lot of training growing up. You learn how to tie shoes, you learn how to get dressed, you learn how to do so many things. And I learned those things too. But the reality is, unless you get the training and really spend enough time to get the training,
Hmm.
then all you're really going to come away with is, oh my gosh, how hard that was. And the reality is, I don't have to put up with that because I can see. And so I hear what you're saying, but that just doesn't work. It's more important that you realize that there's more than one way to accomplish a task. And I may not accomplish the task exactly the same way that you do, but it doesn't mean I can't do it. And so,
Okay.
it's a problem. There are a lot of restaurants, or not a lot, but there are restaurants that have these things called dining in the dark, and
Yes.
they're horrible. And they're horrible because you go in, you're blindfolded, you sit down, somebody might read you a menu, or you look at it ahead of time, you know what you want, you order, and it's brought to you. And they may even have blind people being waiters, and they may even have blind chefs, but they bring you the food and you're trying to eat it and you're having problems and you go, oh my gosh, this is so hard. I don't understand how a blind person could do it. Reality is, if I'm sitting across from you, I'll be sitting there waiting for you to finish because I've finished a long time ago because I know how to do it. It's all about in the training. So don't assume you can just get a sense of it, even if you spend a good part of a day, because unless you go through the training that and truly experience it long enough to truly understand that there are alternatives, it's not going to do you any good other than giving you the wrong impression about blindness.
Well, I appreciate that insight because I would not have thought that. So I definitely appreciate that feedback. So the bottom line is you're going to get the same place we are. You just might take a different route.
Well, I might use different process to get there.
Yeah. Just like the way we all think differently, we might arrive at the same conclusion, but how we arrive at that conclusion could differ based on the person and their life experience.
Right, exactly. And that's okay. It should be okay.
Well, very cool. So as we get ready to wrap up, any final thoughts or advice or just things you would like the audience to especially to know?
Well, again, I think the most important thing that I can say is don't worry about what you can't control. Be aware of it perhaps, but don't worry about it. Don't fear it because it's not going to do you any good to fear it. And I hope people will take that message to heart. I survived the World Trade Center because I knew what to do in an emergency. And more people should learn what to do in an emergency. If you're going to be spending any time at all anywhere, even at a convention or something like that, learn the emergency exits. Don't rely on signs. Learn what the process is and know where the stairwells are in your hotel and how to use them and so on. But most important of all, don't assume that everyone has to do everything exactly the same way in order for them to be as competent as you or as confident as you. The reality is it doesn't work that way. And I hope that people will go out and buy Live Like a Guide Dog, as well as Thunderdog and Running with Roselle. Live Like a Guide Dog, of course, is the most recent book. And if they buy it and they like it, I hope they'll go to Amazon.com and review it because we really would like people to give us reviews. The reality is that people love to read the reviews that people have written about books, and it will make them decide whether they're going to read it or not. So
that's
I hope
exactly right.
review it. But most of all, but most of all, live life. Life's an adventure. Have fun doing it.
Well said. Absolutely right on all of that. But definitely I agree about the reviews too, because you can have the best book in the world, but unless people add the reviews, people won't even give it the time of day, generally speaking.
Right.
So definitely good advice. And we hope that people will do that for your book and for really all the authors who've put their heart and soul into their writing. And again, all of the advice you've shared, it's genuinely appreciated. Thank you.
Well, I hope that if anyone needs a speaker for any kind of an event, they'll reach out. I'm easy to find. It's speaker@michaelhingson.com. That's SPEAKER at MICHAELHINGSON.com. And so love to talk with you about that. And I mentioned earlier, we have a podcast. If anybody wants to be a guest, love to have you. The whole idea behind Unstoppable Mindset is that I believe everyone has a story to tell, and we want people to be able to come on and talk about their stories, talk about what they do, why they did it, and to help show others that they can be more unstoppable than they think they are. So I hope people will want to come on the podcast as well, and they can reach out to me again at speaker@michaelhingson.com for that as well. But love to have you talk to us about coming and speaking at events that you have.
Absolutely. So pay attention, send him that email because I think that was the email address. And I know I'll be sending you my story because you and I talked about that during our pre-interview. Yep. And so one of these days I'll be your guest.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to wrap this up. Here we go.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.